The defense calls to the stand Allah. We have 3 accusations to make against the all-wise Allah. And at me, as a kuffar here, we saw that if Islam is true, then the largest false religion in the world, Christianity, is Jesus' fault. In short, if Jesus had properly taught his followers the one simple message, Allah is one, worship Allah, follow his commands, made sure that his book was actually preserved, warned his followers properly about false teachers, and told his followers that he wasn't crucified and raised from the dead, then Christianity would have never happened, and billions of people wouldn't be worshiping Jesus today. But instead, Jesus has caused more false worship than any human being ever. Bad Jesus.
I made a video debunking this, but I'll give a quick summary. If you want to see a detailed response to this point, click the link in the description, inshallah. Even within your corrupted gospels, you can literally see Jesus emphasizing this point of worshipping God alone, and that God alone is distinct from himself. Even if Jesus asked them to preserve his message, which doesn't have to necessarily be a physical book, it could have been an oral teaching, the stuff that proceeds is outside his control and would be dictated mainly by the free will of his followers and enemies. And the last point is already implied in the first point. In the Gospels, Jesus clearly denies being God and only ever worships the Father alone. He never worships the Trinity. You see, even in your corrupted Gospels, Jesus is letting his followers know that he's not the one true God, unlike the Father.
But perhaps we were too hasty. Another culprit must be cross-examined. The defense calls to the stand Allah. We have 3 accusations to make against the all-wise Allah. If Christianity really is a false religion, there were 3 actions taken by Allah that look highly suspicious. It's almost as if Allah wanted Christianity to succeed. Accusation number 1. At the center of this false religion, Christianity, is the belief that Jesus was crucified and rose again. But if this never happened, if Jesus was never crucified, then where did the Christians get this idea? Did they make it up? No. Allah made the crucifixion appear to them. Quran 4:157 says, "But they neither killed nor crucified Jesus. It was only made to appear so." The central event of the Christian false religion was all Allah's doing. All Allah had to do was nothing, and Christianity would have never started. If Allah wanted to stop Christianity, then why did he start?
Believing Jesus was crucified and resurrected isn't something that would undermine the faith of Muslims, as mentioned by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. What comes after is what is problematic, and what came after was a product of human free will distorting the message of Jesus and deifying him to the level of Allah. Someone believing in a crucifixion doesn't then justify them believing in a resurrection and the divinity of Jesus. Many prophets had died before and weren't deified afterwards. Heck, even a sect of Christians believed in the resurrection and crucifixion and yet never deified Jesus, showing that Allah depicting to a people that a prophet died on the cross has no entailments on anything involving shirk. So this point is extremely underwhelming.
Accusation number 2. Let's go back to the year 50 AD. It's been about 20 years since Jesus was on earth. The story of the crucified and risen Jesus is spreading like wildfire out of Judea and into the wider world. It's being proclaimed by people who think that they're actually serving Allah, but their false message is turning worship away from Allah and towards Jesus. If Islam is true, this is absolutely terrible. Christianity will grow to become the worst thing ever, the largest source of false worship in human history. What does Allah do? Allah could stop this blasphemy. Allah could make another prophet out of a speck of dust at any moment. But instead, Allah waited. Allah watched false worship and did nothing. After Jesus, how long did Allah wait before sending the next prophet to humanity? 50 years? 100 years? No, 570 years. For over half a millennium, the All-Wise One watched on as the world was taught lies about Jesus and Allah. The Supreme Author sat on his hands while the world followed a false book. The All-Hearing One listened as the world worshipped Jesus. The All-Speaking One sent no messenger, no word, no reminder, no book for over 5 centuries. If Allah wanted to stop Christianity, why did he wait so long?
You see, this argument is fallacious because it involves the personal incredulity fallacy. This is similar to the arguments atheists bring when they say gratuitous suffering disproves God's existence. But that involves the assumption that just because you don't understand any wisdoms, it doesn't mean that there aren't any wisdoms behind the suffering. So a Muslim can use the same response here and say Allah knew the best time to send the Prophet upon whom be peace in his infinite wisdom. Even though you don't see that wisdom, Allah knows that wisdom. Secondly, a time and the amount of people is irrelevant and arbitrary. The principle is, would God allow a prophet's message to be distorted for a period of time? And the answer is yes, from the Christian paradigm itself. Like when Moses left and the Israelites worshipped a golden calf, God didn't do anything until Moses returned. Heck, even right now, God is watching as 2 billion Muslims don't worship Jesus and millions of Christians throughout the millennia have converted to Islam. And the Christian God has decided to do nothing for so long. For 2,000 years, he hasn't interfered, even though he promised he would eventually come back. So if you can swallow a 2,000-year gap with billions of people disbelieving in Jesus with no clarification by God, then why can't we be okay with a 600-year gap with millions of people choosing to be astray by worshipping a man and the Trinity? Also, it doesn't take God sending a messenger for a person to know worshipping a man or worshipping a Trinity to be wrong, or to see that the text of the Bible has been distorted with inconsistent theologies present there. Only a Christian would ever say that a prophet would need to clarify these issues, because any academic researcher into the Bible and early church history shows development in doctrine on who God is and contradictory theologies presented in the Gospels.
Accusation number 3. Finally, 570 years later, Allah sends a prophet. By this time, there are 20 million Christians in the world. That's 20 million people who think they are worshiping the true God, but are actually following a false book. Obviously, Allah must convince Christians to give up their book. Christians, to be the true followers of Allah, must be told what you call the Gospels are actually corrupted. What you call the Gospels are not true books. What you call the Gospels were not given to Jesus. You must not read the Gospels anymore.
Allah is using the word gospel in its most original and historical form, which is the message Jesus himself was preaching, and this is found in the Gospels. This can be found generally in the teachings of Jesus within them, where he's preaching one God, to follow the commandments, or the coming of another prophet. Even though the scripture is corrupted, the argument in the Quran brings is to implement the truths found in the Gospels to see the continuity found in Islam.
So how did Allah communicate this vital message? Quran 5:46-47 tells us, "Then, in the footsteps of the prophets, we sent Jesus, son of Mary, confirming the Torah revealed before him. And we gave him the gospel, containing guidance and light in confirming what was revealed in the Torah, a guide and a lesson to the God-fearing. So let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed in it." Oh my goodness, let's get this straight. Allah must tell Christians to reject false books that they call the Gospels. And yet, Allah refers to the true book given to Jesus as the gospel. Allah needs Christians to reject the Gospels, yet says that Christians should judge by the gospel. According to Islam, there's a book that Allah gave to Jesus. By the time of Muhammad, no one has seen this book for over half a millennium. No Christian alive knows that it ever existed, so obviously they don't have a word for it. So in his wisdom, what word does Allah use to refer to Jesus' book? He calls it the gospel. Allah refers to the true book using the very same word that the Christians use for their false books. Allah took the word that Christians use for their own made-up, false, blasphemous books and applied it to the true book. If Allah wanted to stop Christianity, why didn't Allah tell Christians to give up their book? Why did Allah make it highly likely that Christians would confuse their false books with Jesus' true book?
The earliest exegesis we have of Quran 5:47, when it says to judge by the gospel, is one of judging by the truths in there, such as pardoning the oppressor. Nothing having to do with accepting the crucifixion, resurrection, or other things that the Quran denies. Allah already condemns those false teachings found in the Gospels, such as the Trinity or the idea that Jesus is God, which I would argue are more interpretation issues than it being the text itself. Nevertheless, God never advocates for this entire thing.
Given these 3 accusations, there are 3 possible verdicts. Number 1, Allah is an ignorant moron. Or number 2, Allah wanted Christians to become Christians. Or number 3, the Quran was invented by an illiterate Arabic merchant who didn't know the first thing about the Gospels. While Jesus' role in the rise of Christianity is inexcusable, there's an even more guilty party. Allah faked the founding event of Christianity. Allah did nothing for over 5 centuries as Christianity spread, and Allah told the Christians that he gave Jesus the gospel, knowing that this would cause confusion. Who's to blame for Christianity? It's Allah.
Nothing implies these 3 possibilities you presented. The crucifixion is not the entirety of Christianity, and belief of this doesn't then entail all of the shirk teachings you guys teach. Allah in his wisdom waits for the right time for revelation, and Allah uses the name gospel to refer to the true teachings found where Jesus is preaching in the Gospels. The Quran doesn't deny truth in these books. Also, the idea that the Quran is ignorant of what's found in the Gospel is an unsubstantiated view to take. The Quran mentions teachings in the 4 Gospels like the camel and the needle parable, or the parable of a mustard seed growing. It's conscious of the parable of the virgins with lamps also. And finally, the Quran obviously is conscious of there being a crucifixion narrative mentioned in their books. We also don't find anyone accusing the Quran early on of having no knowledge of the Gospels. So if it was the case that the Quran doesn't have knowledge on it and is strawmanning many points, why did no Christian bring this up? We find Christians asking about the sister of Harun point, or the idea that Christians worship their monks in 931. So why did they never bring up the fact that the Quran has no knowledge of their scriptures that they have in their possession? It's obviously because anyone with the slightest bit of intelligence can see the Quran knows the contents of the Gospels and what they teach. If you want to support this channel and participate in Discord lessons almost every week, then become a Patreon member down below for $10 a month. You'll get notes on the early church fathers that have direct contact to myself, and it ultimately supports the dawah for the channel. You can also donate through my PayPal and GoFundMe links down below. Jazakallah khair for the support. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.